New coaching staff here. New offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, new defensive tackles coach in Bo Davis. Cyril's, who was very well respected in the SEC. And is it no surprise that when Mac went to go get an offensive line and defensive line coach, he went to the Southeastern Conference?
Not at all. Why? Because they run the football more than any other conference, and you have to defend against the run more than any other conference. I should say with top talent like that, top-notch talent for sure, on both sides of the ball. And, there are some sturdy and heavy running backs, powerful, that come out of that conference. That's happened ever since that conference was established. Right. We know that. And these two guys were well respected amongst their conference. I talked to a few buddies that went to both of these schools, and when you talk to them, they say, man, sure hate you guys were able to pick up those two guys, because it's true, and Coach Brown and the reputation that Texas has, it was great for them. They wanted to come here. They want to be here. And I'm just really happy that they're a part of this group. And I think early on you've been able to see their impression on both offense and defensive line.
Well, they've done a good job of pass protecting to make sure that whichever Texas quarterback is in there can get the ball to the receivers. Most receiving yards Saturday versus UCLA, DJ Grant. A lot of people here in Austin very proud. The LBJ grad had really sat out his first 3 years because of serious knee injuries, also had a hamstring injury, but had a breakout game. 3 touchdowns, 77 yards. Mike Davis matched the yards with 77 yards, no touchdown, but once again, if Texas is going to go deep, you may be looking for number 1. Jackson Shipley, mentioned earlier, a couple of big third down conversions. He just continues to impress at the tender age of 18, yet plays like a veteran, and there is number 8 Jackson Shipley. Now, if you're a defensive back, what scares you the most about Shipley?
Everything.
Really?
He can do so many things, and he's so mature. And the one thing that you lack also for guys who are students of the game, there's only 3 games of film on him at this level. And if I'm a guy and I know I have to take on Broyles or Fuller or Blackman, I can go back into the vault a year ago.
Check out tendencies.
And try to check out the tendencies, see where they line up. But with Jackson Shipley, that's not the case.
Yeah.
You're just going out here on a whim, hoping that you can cover a guy who's as athletic as you. I mean, I guarantee you number 8 could line up in a back pedal, and he'd be quite fine, playing defensive back. But he's got great hands. His route running ability, you can tell he's been schooled by one of the best route runners that I've seen here at Texas in Jordan Shipley. I always thought that guy did an incredible job, and he's just learned a lot being around the game. He's a coach's son. He's sharp enough to be a quarterback playing wide receiver. There's so many things about him that really help his game, and he just does a nice job of grouping all those things together and putting his best foot forward on Saturday.
You see Coach Wyatt with the American Gladiators arm pads, making sure he didn't get beat up. We go from receivers to tight ends, and boy, the tight ends are almost as important, maybe just as important in this passing offense for Texas. Bruce Chambers, longtime Dallas Carter coach, came with Mac Brown in 1998 and has been here ever since, now coaching the tight ends. I want to ask you, obviously we talked about DJ Grant. When are we going to see Blaine Irby get a catch? Soon?
I think it's coming very soon, and I think if we're looking at what this Texas offense has been able to do in the first 3 weeks of the season, they want to sneak in plays on you that you're not expecting. And so Blaine Irby, who's primarily a blocker in this offense, and he's mighty good at it.
Yeah.
He's also has some great hands, and he proved that even when he was playing early on here. And I think at some point it'll come that he'll get a shot to make that big catch on a big third down. And, for him, getting that first catch, I think, will help him take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm back in the grind, I'm back in here, and I'm doing my job. And you just hope it works out for him. And both of those two guys, DJ Grant and Blaine Irby, I mean, you could give both of those the comeback player of the year early on for what they've been able to do, overcoming tough knee injuries and really helping this offense put points on the board.
The doctors weren't sure if Blaine Irby would ever walk the same again, much less play Division I football. DJ Grant there. Mac Brown said, I just really didn't think he was ever going to play again. It was that bad. It just continued to get worse. But both those guys put a tremendous amount of effort in the weight room, in the doctor's office. I mean, they were all over the place, and certainly spent too much time for their likes in the training room. But Chambers coaching him up right now. What is he working on right now?
Well, you have those explosive defensive ends that do so many things now. When you have these classic pass rushers like Dwight Freeney, one of his favorite moves is a spin move. And right here, what they're working on is being in the proper position, keeping your hands in the right place to be able to prevent them from spinning. And the one way that you do that is by keeping constant pressure on them, because if you keep constant pressure on them, they're spinning and they're going backwards. But if you don't do that, they're going to spin right underneath you and make that play that we've seen, infamous play for an offensive lineman or a tight end, get back inside and cut that quarterback off. And at that point, your quarterback's running for his dear life.
Right. Sometimes they can be the most important blocker for the Texas offensive line. The Texas offense has been helped by turnovers. One of the big focal points for Texas in the summer camp was to create more turnovers, and it's put this offense in some short situations where they've been able to utilize the tight end. A la DJ Grant, his 3 touchdowns at the Rose Bowl. MJ McFarland, one of the youngsters, really a pretty talented tight end core when you look at it, Ahmad. I know there were some question marks, especially injury-wise, with Irby and Grant, if they'd be able to play. But now that they've come back and look as good as they do, got some young guys behind that. Barrett Matthews is a very solid blocker. Ahmad Howard. I think Coach Harsin has kind of been pleasantly surprised with how much talent they really have at that position.
And he uses it the right way. And that's the one thing. The more special qualities you can see in a player, it expands your offensive scheme and playbook. When you see a guy like DJ, of course, Grant, and you tell yourself, well, he's just about as fast as any safety in the country with a knee brace on, and he's got great hands. Well, why don't we use him to stretch the football field? And it makes perfect sense. And, the one thing is you don't want to get too complicated in your game plan where players become disinterested because they think you're doing too much. Believe in the athletic ability that your players are showing you, and give them an opportunity on Saturday to be better than the people that they're going against. And that always helps players and coaches with their relationship and build rapport, because as a player you have that comfortability of knowing, you know what, this guy trusts me and I could trust him now because his scheme is going to get me open. And
the tight ends they can be so big in the red zone, and that's, you look at what Texas has been able to do in the red zone, Ahmad. It's pretty staggering. You look at the numbers,
Indeed.
Especially compared to what they did last year. But Texas was 5 for 5 in the red zone against UCLA with 5 touchdowns. You'll take 2 touchdowns and 3 field goals and say, hey, we were 5 for 5 and we got points out of it.
I think this was the thing that stood out to me in the stat sheet, and I didn't even realize it was happening while watching the game. You look at it, they're 11 of 13 in red zone scoring this year. That's 84%.
Yeah, they'll take
which
that
is
any day
fantastic. In addition to that, of the 11 times they've scored, 9 have been touchdowns. 69% when they get 20 and in. For people who don't know what a red zone is, the 20-yard line of your opposing team and in, that is what's considered the red zone. They score touchdowns.
Yeah.
That was an issue last year on offense, and it's been great for them this year because they've been able to score touchdowns and not kick field goals.
They have. And you take a look at the defense, most turnovers forced by Big 12 teams this season. Oklahoma State has looked dynamite. Their offense has, and one of the reasons their offense has looked so good, the defense is getting them the ball in great positions. 9 turnovers this year. They are 3-0. Texas is really second on that. 8 turnovers forced this year. They are also 3-0, and it's not shocking that the top 5 teams in the Big 12 in terms of forced turnovers, all of them are undefeated. Carrington Bindum caused one of those turnovers, has had a nice diving interception, and he's one of those guys. He looked the part in the summer. He looks like a cornerback, but I've been not shocked, but pleasantly surprised about his performance and what he's been able to do, because Carrington Bindum is certainly, a key to this defense. They have so many young cornerbacks, but he looks like a veteran back there, Ahmad.
What I really like about this group, in addition to everything you said, KD, is their humility. They realize that their toughest challenge, when you look at their schedule, awaits them. But the way that they've worked, they've challenged themselves every day, every week in practice, which allows them to get out on the football field on Saturday and to display their skills. As you mentioned, Carrington Bindum, he's been as solid as any in the back end when he's been called upon to be in man-to-man coverage and shut someone down. He'll be asked to do more of that in more strenuous situations throughout the year. And he's a young man that, like you said, he's progressing right before us. He, along with Adrian Phillips, who's also one of the X factors, in my opinion, of this secondary, playing safety, playing nickel, playing corner. And then, of course, the young true freshman, Quandre Diggs, playing extremely well there. Kenny Vaccaro also doing a nice job of covering in the slot. And last but not least, the man who roams the middle, Mr. Blake Gideon. And this group has been special, and they remind you of some of the secondaries back in the early 2000s. And, of course, 2005 secondary, where you see players out there and you go, they have plenty of prospects.
Oh, I remember Lane Kiffin said he looked at the Texas starting 11 and said 9 of those guys will play in the NFL, and I think he was correct about that. The guy who could play in the NFL physically is a guy, Christian Scott, number 6, had to sit out for the first 3 games, is going to be back for the Iowa State game, and Scott is a guy who, obviously there's a lot of talent in the secondary. How does he fit in, and can he fit in?
He fits in perfectly fine, and perhaps he would have been the starter opposite of Blake Gideon. Due to his suspension, he hasn't been able to do that, and Kenny Vaccaro and Nolan Brewster have done a nice job of filling in, but he's different than any piece you see out there right now. He likes to lay the boom. He will come up. He'll cause fumbles. He'll tackle well in the open field, but he's not a mismatch either in coverage. Christian Scott is a great talent out of the Dallas area, and Coach Akina and this staff are really happy they have him back.
So we are going to see Scott against Iowa State, you think?
No question.
Dwayne Akina back up to Warren Moon at the University of Washington. He was a quarterback. Still loves to, fling it around. You'll see him. But he definitely grabs the ball anytime they're going to be throwing footballs to the DBs because he thinks he still has got a pretty good arm. And you know what? He does. Here you get a good look at the Texas Tower. We're inside the bubble. We'll be back with Texas practice right after this.
Enter any classroom at Goldsmith Hall and you feel it, an overwhelming creative exuberance. This passion for design is shared by the entire architecture school, most notably UT's Dean of Architecture, Dr. Frederick Fritz Steiner.
I was interested in design from the time I was a child. I was always drawing. When I was an undergraduate, I read a book called Design with Nature, which was written by a man named Ian McHarg. And that's when everything came together, that I realized that there's an approach to design in its broadest sense that could be based on nature and natural processes. I've been active in green design movement ever since.
Fritz has authored his own creative philosophy called Design for a Vulnerable Planet. The premise of the book says that architecture must assume responsibility for the cities we inhabit, that design is much more than simple aesthetics.
Architecture needs to move away from a great object and great man mentality to making the world a better place for all of us to live. It's the first time in human history over half the planet lives in cities. Currently in the United States, buildings use 50% of the energy used, and they also produce approximately 50% of the greenhouse gases. So it's imperative that we design in a more responsible way.
But it's not just energy consumption at stake. Flawed design can have disastrous repercussions.
One of the best examples, of course, is Hurricane Katrina. It was a natural disaster which was made worse by the failure of the levees. Earthquake areas. Look at flooding. It could be fairly easy to design in such a way to avoid dangerous spots. So I think there's been a growing awareness that we could design our cities in a very different way.
Mac Brown Radio Show, Wednesdays, 7 p.m. Central. You're not going to want to miss tonight. The coach will have Bruce Chambers, the tight end coach, and also his pupil right now, DJ Grant. 3 touchdowns against UCLA. Mac Brown's Radio Show, Wednesdays at 7, right here on LHN. Welcome back to Texas Practice alongside former Texas defensive back Ahmad Brooks. I'm Kevin Dunn, and Ahmad used to have to cover guys like this. Mike Davis trying to go high to pull that one down. So you see the Texas quarterbacks and receivers working together. And Ahmad, how deep of a group do you think this receiving core is?
I think it's one of the deepest in the Big 12. And I say that with all due respect to other programs throughout this conference, because this is a conference since 1999. I'll never forget when Mike Leach in Oklahoma brought the spread into the Big 12, I was on the football field. I'll never forget what it was like covering guys like Josh Norman, who were typically running backs and tight ends at the wide receiver position, and to see how it's developed now and the respect